يفقه قولي. اللهم انفعنا بما علمتنا وعلمنا ما ينفعنا وزدنا علما. اللهم ربنا زدنا علما. اللهم أرنا حقيقة الأشياء كما هي. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. آمين يا رب العالمين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So we're going to be picking up pace today, inshallah. We will be finishing Surat Baqarah and starting Surat Imran. We do plan on finishing 15 juz, inshallah, within this month of Ramadan. Surat Baqarah was a tad slower, but that would mean that we can go a little bit faster in the rest of our sessions, inshallah. Moving right along to the 37th ruku. And as we've seen since the conversation started with Ayatul Kursi, there is more and more mention of infaq fi sabilillah. Now, again, remember infaq as opposed to nifaq. Nifaq is hypocrisy. Infaq, coming from the same root, being very closely tied to the concept of nifaq as well. So linguistically, the words are similar, yes, and conceptually, they're very similar in that hypocrisy being the disease, infaq fi sabilillah being the prevention. Now, being the prevention, it is not, as we discussed yesterday or in the last session, does not necessarily have to be, there's no guarantee, there's no 100% immunization, if you will. Right? You can, given the wrong attitude, still get infected. Your infaq can be for all the wrong reasons. So regarding that as well as we go on. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا أنفقوا من طيبات ما كسبتم. So you who have believed, spend in the way of Allah, spend from what you have, from the pure things that you've earned, your efforts, your hard work, spend from that. وَمِمَّا أَخْرَجْنَا لَكُم مِّنَ الْأَرْضِ, and of what we have produced for you from earth. وَلَا تَيَمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ تُنْفِقُونَ, and do not aim to spend from it the defective of it. So when it comes to spending, the crumbs off your table, if all of what spending ends up being, or your charity, your sadaqat in the way of Allah, for others, if they are taking out the trash from your own house, giving the worst of what you have, then that says something. Then that says something about priorities, that says something about how seriously all of this is being taken, how important. Remember, as far as the individual is concerned, the spending in the way of Allah, or spending for others, or spending to support those in need, there is a spiritual goal of it, for it, right? That of personal growth, for the individual's own growth, which has to be kept in mind. And if keeping that in mind, all that ends up in charity is what needs to be filtered out of your house to begin with, what you need to dispense away, then there's something really wrong there. So وَلَا تَيَمَّمُوا الْخَبِيثَ مِنْهُ تُنْفِقُونَ, and don't aim to spend from it the defective of it. وَلَسْتُمْ بِآخِذِي, you would not have taken it. Simple standard. You don't know, is this something I would, is this something worthy of my spiritual goals? Is it something worthy of being given to somebody else? Would I take it had it been given to me? إِلَّا أَن تُغْمِضُوا فِيهِ, except with closed eyes. وَاعْلَمُوا أَنَّ اللَّهَ غَنِيٌّ حَمِيدٌ, and know that Allah is ghani and worthy of praise. Again, the attributes of Allah, especially the one of Him being ghani, Him being rich, him being, him having pretty much everything, right? And his ghina being put out as a reminder, and his being worthy of praise uh, put in front of us, that you're giving in the way of Allah. Remember him giving you these opportunities despite being ghani. These are opportunities, so take them as such. Ash-shaytanu ya'idukumul faqr. Shaitan threatens you of poverty. And more than any other um, phenomenological experience that we've had, or experiences in our own head that we've had, this particular demonic experience would stand out. That when it comes to spending in the way of Allah, the thought cycles that begin, the ideas that start popping into our head as to how many other more needs we have that we could put this money to use for. So even the very basic charity that we're doing, the zakat that we're giving, or the sadaqat that we are being asked to give, as soon as we start reflecting or considering the possibility of giving, all the alternate options that open up, all the needs that just start springing up in our heads, and how if we give here or spend here, what about those other options? What about all those other needs? What about this? What about that? What about this expense, that expense? The balance sheet opens up in our head, right? And typically the balance sheet is headed towards, or the conclusion for the balance sheet is also drawn, that there is, you can't give this particular place or this much. It's too much. It's not needed. You can give it later, right? You have these other priorities. And then you would find that pretty much the same amount for something frivolous that was not on that original list of needs would just spring out of your pocket and out. The thing is bought. Whatever it is, you've already purchased it. It didn't take long for you to swipe on your phone or your credit card, or take the bills out of your wallet without thinking twice about it, for something that you're not even going to need, or you're probably not even going to use a lot. When it came to charity, when it came to spending, when it came to fi sabilillah, when it came to infaq, there was this entire thought process. The whole balance sheet was drawn. And the conclusion from the get-go, when the balance sheet was being drawn, that I shouldn't spend or I shouldn't give, when it came to spending in something frivolous, in something, for something trivial, for something that you just saw while shopping online, whatever, the whole process didn't exist. The ideas of faqr, or the ideas of other pressing needs, didn't come up. Ash-shaytanu ya'idukumul faqr. So shaitan threatens you of poverty, وَيَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالْفَحْشَاءِ, and commands you to immorality. So what would you rather do? And there's one thing that both of these have in common. Faqr and fahsha, immediate gratification. They're looking for self-indulgence. Stinginess and fahsha both have that one end in mind: self-gratification, self-indulgence, immediate gratification, right? And both of those are essentially destructive when it comes to if they become the norm, or the ruling factor, the main principle around which your decisions are being made. And so what does shaitan want? For you to not grow. His ends are the exact opposite of what your Rabb and his Rububiyyah has in store for you, or wants for you, what his ideals are, right? So faqr, or threats of faqr, or apprehensions about faqr and fahsha, would hold you back from all of those avenues and lead for you to self-indulge, immediately gratify, and not grow. Wallahu ya'idukum maghfiratan minhu wa fadla. While Allah promises you His forgiveness and His grace. So forgiveness and grace from Allah, ability to atone or opportunities to atone and grow more and more. Wallahu wasi'un alim, and Allah is all encompassing and knowing. Yu'til hikmata man yasha. He grants wisdom to whoever He wills. وَمَنْ يُؤْتَ الْحِكْمَةِ, and whoever is granted wisdom, فَقَدْ أُوتِيَ خَيْرًا كَثِيرًا, he has definitely been given a great wealth. Khair in the Quran is utilized to connote wealth as well. And here, when the conversation about wealth and spending from your wealth is taking place, this ayah pops up in between. This ayah about wisdom being a great wealth. And one of the things that have been taken out from this placement of this ayah in this entire context of spending fi sabilillah is that one way to attain wisdom, hikmah, is to be more and more self-transcendent, to give out more of yourself, to give out more from you, to do more infaq fi sabilillah, and sadaqat is a way of nurturing wisdom. Now, what does charity have to do with wisdom? For one thing, the more you're giving out, the more you've allowed for yourself to step out of those vicious those vicious cycles of demonic thought. You've allowed for yourself to step out of those, where most of your thought was in the service of the stinginess and the fahsha. Most of your thought was being employed to rationalize your vested interests, to rationalize selfishness. That's all of what it was in the service of. Again, your intellect, your reason, incredibly potent, incredibly, it's what human beings are distinguished on the basis of, right? But it can be employed as a tool towards demonic ends. When you've started to give out, when you've stepped out of that, when you've identified from within your own self these processes of rationalization in the as demonic strategies, that your own intellect is being used against you, and you're coming up with all of these excuses for not giving more, for not giving now, right? And being able to step out of it, being able to give, opens those doors for, okay, now that reason is available for other ends, for a more divine ends, for more self-transcendent ends, right? And for that selflessness to be rewarded with wisdom as a consequence, you'll be able to see that. So much of the Quran does not make sense. It does not make sense because of this demonic economy or demonic economics that goes on in our head. So much of the Quran does not make sense. So much of what needs to be done, self-transcendence, doesn't make sense. Giving, spending, forgiving, all of that, it's completely irrational in that economics. And so unless you take that leap, unless you step out of those circular reasonings, you're not going to be able to make sense of a whole lot of things. You're not going to be able to see how charity relates with personal growth, how it relates with social growth, how the development of the community is not going to be happening without giving out, without infaq fi sabilillah. There is going to be so much that is going on within the head of that person which is going to make him ungrateful, unable to see others in pain because they're so caught up in themselves. Again, we talk about infaq fi sabilillah as a cure or as a prevention against hypocrisy, because essentially a hypocritical person is so caught up with himself that they're unable to see pain in the world. They're unable to see problems in the world. They're unable to see opportunities of meaning in the world, precisely because all they can see is their own victimization. All they can see is their own pain. All they can see is how they've always, and these terminologies are going to be used, always been unjustly treated, how they've always been deprived, how they've always been exploited. These, and anything that there is to be grateful for, any good that's happened to them, all of a sudden gets covered up. Everything outside and everything unjust that is done to them, that will be true, of course, is selectively picked up, and it's made the only experience, or the all-embracing experience. And anything that's going on with anybody else and their needs and their problems, reflexively the thought process that kicks in, yeah, well, but me, I've just been through this and this and that, and why should I give? Right? So this, whenever a human being sees another in pain or in need, the very spiritual tendency, or very, very human response to give, to help, to support, to empathize, there is an obstacle in that path, and that obstacle comes from this self-centeredness, that immediately on looking at the other in need and in pain, your own, that there's this avalanche of thoughts about my needs, my pain, my abuse, how I've been victimized. And before you know it, the other person's pain is lost. It can't even be seen anymore. And you've just lost yourself, or thrust yourself in the midst of self-victimization, of self-pity. And in that entire process, justified and rationalized not giving, not empathizing, not looking at the other person's side of the picture. And implicitly, or uh, as a consequence of all of that, is that you end up doing nothing for anybody else. Most of your life becomes all about you, all about you. Uh, for the most part, for the majority, the earnings, the efforts, everything. At maximum, it will extend to children or family. At maximum. The rest of the community, the rest of the society, the world is going to hell anyways. So to be able to step out of that, these vicious cycles of self-centeredness, these vicious demonic cycles of how you will be worse off if you were, because really giving out to others makes yourself vulnerable. When you give out to others, you are opening the doors. You are making yourself insecure by having less. You are opening yourself up for the other to look back and say, I want more, or this isn't enough, or you need to do more. For the other to not appreciate, those possibilities are very much there. That the very people, the very community you're looking to serve, they come back at you. They say, you're no good. You're not going to find immediate appreciation or gratitude in response to whatever it is that you do. And you start thinking, is it even worth it? Are these people even worth it? Why should I be giving to them? So to go back into your cocoon, to go back into that self-centeredness, the world doesn't deserve it. Nothing's going to change. Everything is too bleak. Everything is too pessimistic. Everything is too dark, unjust, exploitative. They're doing it worse than I am. And we have all of these people to identify who are actually doing it worse than we are. وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ, and none will learn a lesson except those who understand. وَمَا أَنفَقْتُم مِّن نَفَقَةٍ أَوْ نَذَرْتُم مِّن نَذْرٍ, whatever you spend in charity or vow a vow, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُهُ, Allah definitely knows it. So another thing that comes up when you do reflect over, okay, what is my giving going to do? What is little old me and the little old charity that I have to give in the face of all the problems in the world? So once you are able to finally get yourself out of your own trap, which is all the demonic cycle allows you to see, and look around in the world, what you see is that, oh my God, there is so much of this crap in other people in the society and everywhere. So what if I clear a little bit of it out? So what if I help in this way or that way? What difference is that going to make? Allah steps in and says, whatever it is that you spend, whatever it is that you spend, فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ, Allah knows it. Allah knows it. He will, that butterfly effect, or to put barakah in that that little of whatever you give. Foremost for it, the hikmah that opens the doors for you to, and the growth that it allows for you to attain, and then what you can do thereafter. The human resource that is developing within you, and then of course within society, in the long run, that is going to clear out that whatever unsolvable, irresolvable issues that you see in the world. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْلَمُ وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ, and the unjust people, they will get no helpers. So this spending in the way of Allah, Allah knowing however little it may be, Allah is promising you His help. That whatever you step out for, against injustice, against oppression, Allah is with you. Allah's help is with you. And when you do it in the face of injustice and oppression, and you feel that all the help seems to be with them, Allah reassures you, وَمَا لِلظَّالِمِينَ مِنْ أَنصَارٍ, the unjust people will get no helpers. إِن تُبْدُوا الصَّدَقَاتِ فَنِعِمَّا هِيَ, and so if you give your charity in public, it's good. وَإِن تُخْفُوهَا وَتُؤْتُوهَا الْفُقَرَاءَ, but if you give it to the poor secretly, فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ, that is better for you. That is better for you spiritually. As far as the public good that comes out of a public charity, that's awesome. It motivates others, it inspires. But whatever you do secretly, that's good for you, precisely because it's for the most part assisting you in overcoming you're not serving one selfish interest for another, right? So spending out in the way of Allah, for the main part, for popularity, to be seen and accepted by others, rather than the bigger goals that it promises, can also be dangerous, right? So minding that as well, and having a mix of what's spent publicly and what's spent secretly. وَيُكَفِّرُ عَنْكُمْ مِنْ سَيِّئَاتِكُمْ, and it will remove from you some of your sins. You have sayyi'at, you've made mistakes, wrongs, sins, they're all over your balance sheet. Spending in the way of Allah helps cover those up, under the carpet, forgotten, done, dusted. Wallahu bima ta'maluna khabir, Allah is aware of all of what you do. Laysa alayka hudahum, you are not responsible to guide them, Ya Rasulullah. Walakin Allah yahdi man yasha, in fact it is Allah who guides the one who wants to be, or the one who Allah wants to guide. Again, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's frustration, again, we're in Medina, when these ayat are being revealed. A decade in Mecca has already passed, yet his frustration when people don't respond, yet his frustration when they don't see what is so clear to him from the Quran, what is so clear to the Sahaba. And so when others don't see, despite him having spent everything, the reform, the guidance at the level of community is not coming. Allah reassures him, Allah consoles him, and despite all of, so see, from age 40 all the way to the revelation of these ayat, and then of course all the way to the passing away of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, if there is one word that describes his life, is that he spent everything. Everything and anything that he had was spent in the way of Allah, was spent for people to see. And actually, even prior to age 40, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was spending for the good of people, for the support of people, when he didn't even have money. All he could do was help somebody out with their chores, he'd do that. If that's all he could do, he'd do that. He wouldn't let any opportunity go by, but that wouldn't change anything. Problems were too big for him to solve. And now we're in Medina, and so much of more than 2/3 of the Quran has been revealed. Only a small pack of believers, and it would get to him. And so Allah would reassure him. وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَهْدِي مَن يَشَاءُ. It is Allah who guides the one who wants to be guided, or the one Allah wants to guide. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ فَلِأَنفُسِكُمْ. And whatever you spend for charity, it is of benefit to you. So as individuals, it is come to strengthen you. As a community, it is going to come back to your community and make it grow. As counterintuitive as it may seem, it is going to lead to the development of that community. وَمَا تُنْفِقُونَ إِلَّا ابْتِغَاءَ وَجْهِ اللَّهِ. Provided you spend with the intent of pleasing Allah, for the pleasure of Allah. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ يُوَفَّى إِلَيْكُمْ. Whatever you spend will be given back to you in full. وَأَنْتُمْ لَا تُظْلَمُونَ. And you will not be treated unjustly. In the hereafter, yes, but we know for a fact that more and more charity means more and more a stronger community, a stronger economy even. لِلْفُقَرَاءِ الَّذِينَ أُحْسِرُوا فِي سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. Charity is for the needy who are engaged so much in the cause of Allah, لَا يَسْتَطِيعُونَ ضَرْبًا فِي الْأَرْضِ, that they cannot move about in the land to earn their livelihood. Particularly the Ashab al-Sufha, the people of the bench. This is the University of Medina at the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, where these group of people who have committed and dedicated themselves to learn from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam for the most part of the day. And all of what they would do is learn from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu being one of them, Hazrat Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu being one of them for the longest part as well. Right, and all they're looking to do is learn Quran, learn the application of Quran, learn how Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam deals with everybody, and just committing that, internalizing that, and they were to become later the teachers of the ummah, and we owe it to their sacrifice. Our civilization, for the past 14 centuries, what it has given us and what it has given the entire world, owes itself to this group of people having dedicated themselves to doing just this, learning from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, being in his vicinity for the most part of their day. And when they have made this commitment, then they cannot go around earning their livelihood. They cannot, right? So the responsibility for their maintenance, for their care, falls on Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as the head of the community. And as members of that community, encouragement is to give in the way of Allah the zakat and the sadaqat, such that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam can help them better, can facilitate them, can maintain their needs better. Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu, he goes around one day stricken with hunger. So this learning from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam as part of that group means a lot of hunger, means a lot of meals being skipped, not having seen the fire lit in your own house for days. And so Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu one day couldn't maintain it. It was just getting too much. The hunger was getting to him. And he's not going to go around and beg either. He's not going to go ask anybody that I need money. He's the integrity, the khuddari as we say, is such that he wouldn't do that. But then again, hunger is increasing. So he goes out to Hazrat Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he recites this ayah 273 للفقراء الذين أحصروا في سبيل الله. And he says, what do you think this ayah means? And Hazrat Umar just, had a nice discussion with him on that ayah. I think it's talking about these people and that people, and we should be giving out in the way of Allah. And that's that. Interesting. Thank you. And he moves on. He goes to Hazrat Abu Bakr radiallahu ta'ala anhu. Again, what do you think this ayah means? And Abu Bakr goes into talking about that ayah as to what it means and what he thinks it means and how it should apply and all of that. And then he's like, okay. And then he moves on. Finally to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's like, Ya Rasulullah, what does this ayah mean? And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not give him a dars or does not respond with an explanation or a tafsir of the ayah. He smiles instead. And he asks for a pot of milk to be brought, which was probably given by somebody. And when it is brought, and Abu Huraira is the one bringing it, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not tell him to drink from it straight out. Although he is waiting for that, he couldn't want anything more. He says, bring the rest of the Ashab al-Sufha here as well. And Abu Huraira is like, I mean, come on, you can't do this to me. You've seen, and and it's a small pot. I mean, how much? But he's like, okay, if you say so. And he brings he didn't say all of that. I mean, he wouldn't say all of that, but it is what he was thinking as he tells us in the hadith himself. He brings the rest of them out, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, first them. And he's thinking to himself, it's like, this is, it's not going to be enough. All of them are going to drink before I do. There's so many of them. What about me? But he listens and obeys. He does as Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says. And he passes it around, and finally his turn comes, and he is sure there's not going to be enough. And Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, drink. And he drinks. And he drinks. And then he's full, and Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, drink more. And he continues to drink. And there is enough in there. And he continues to drink to the point that he's full. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, drink more. And he says, that's it, I can't drink anymore. I am full. For however many hours or days he was hungry, he was full from that cup of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, even after having given from it freely. تعرفهم بسيماهم لا يستطيعون ضربا في الأرض يحسبهم الجاهل أغنياء من التعفف. The ignorant one thinks that they are well because of their restraint. Jahil is a very interesting word in Arabic. It is usually the one who is ignorant, and it's probably a good idea to look at Jahil as we just spoke about hikmah and how charity opens the doors to wisdom, how charity allows for a person to be granted wisdom. And how does that work? Jahil is not just ignorant. Jahil is one overridden by emotions. Jahil is one who is overridden by emotions. And emotions tend to be very, very instinctive, very, very self-centered, right? And so when you are overridden by self-centered, instinctive emotions, you're caught up in yourself, you're not able to see around you. You're not able to see the pain around you. You're not able to see the needs of others. So you really have to be, um, your ignorance is compounded with self centeredness, and empathy, giving, charity becomes all the more difficult. تعرفهم بسيماهم, you can only recognize them by their signs. لا يسألون الناس إلحافا, they don't ask from people persistently. They're not going to beg. They're not going to latch onto their feet and insist, we need, give, more, more. No. If somebody sees that they're in need, as they should be able to, and this is again speaking so much of what kind of a community the Quran envisions, in which people don't have to go around asking. Yet, the members of that community, the privileged members of the community, should be concerned so as to know that they would need, that this would be of use to them or benefit to them. وَمَا تُنْفِقُوا مِنْ خَيْرٍ, whatever of wealth you spend, إِنَّ اللَّهَ بِهِ عَلِيمٌ, Allah knows for sure. الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ أَمْوَالَهُمْ بِاللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ, so those who spend their wealth by night and day, سِرًّا وَعَلَانِيَةً, both secretly and openly, فَلَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ, their reward is with their Rabb. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, these are the people who have nothing to fear nor grieve. الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا, those who consume riba. So the best thing that you can do with your wealth is spending in the way of Allah. Right? And we're going to find out in later parts of the Mus'haf as we read, but then those parts have been revealed already in the Meccan Quran, that you don't spend beyond your spiritual capacity either. That you end up spending so much that you're not able to maintain yourself after that, and maintain yourself economically, yes, but then also spiritually, with respect to your attitude. Maintain that positivity, or maintain that acceptance, or maintain that sabr that is necessitated in the aftermath of having given out, right? So there is that balance for sure. Nevertheless, the best thing you can do with your wealth is spending in the way of Allah. Then there is the worst thing that you can do with your wealth, and that is to give money to those in need and then ask them or mandate them to give you back on interest, with interest. That would be the best way for a selfish person to proceed, or that makes sense. Or if your principle of economics is self-interest, if you can do with your wealth whatever the hell you want to, right? But then that is the worst thing you can possibly do when it comes to your spirituality, when it comes to your community. So, الَّذِينَ يَأْكُلُونَ الرِّبَا, those who consume riba, لَا يَقُومُونَ, they will not stand. إِلَّا كَمَا يَقُومُ الَّذِي يَتَخَبَّطُهُ الشَّيْطَانُ مِنَ الْمَسِّ, except as those whom shaitan has driven to insanity by his touch. Again, relating to all of what we spoke about, what a jahil, overridden by instinctive emotions, what the common underlying principle that we spoke about, that fahsha and the ya'idukumul faqr have, self-interest. And self-interest and interest, they have a lot in common as well. That all you're looking, when you're making money off of money, exploiting another person's needs at that time, looking to put them further in trouble, or because on the face of it, you're saying, okay, I'll help you out. But really, you're not helping them out. You're making them poorer in the long run by giving them, by lending them, by loaning them at that point. So in the long run, you end up richer, they end up even poorer. That's the worst thing that can possibly be done. So shaitan driving you to insanity And quite honestly, we can see it in the society around us that this is as self centered as humanity has gotten, perhaps in its entire history. Maybe in pre scripture days, in pre Abrahamic days, you would see this level of self centeredness and this self centeredness being passed around or glorified as individualism. That's incredible. But we haven't seen a more self-centered society. And self-centeredness does come with its own baggage of diagnostic categories, of neurotic and psychotic disorders. It does. It is at the root of it. And it's self-centeredness which is so socially prevalent. It is so ingrained within the society that if an individual is stricken by it and will necessarily be stricken by it in the 21st century, can you really blame them? The wisest thing to do, the smartest thing to do, is to understand the instinctive tendency within, the demonic tendency within, the instinct for self interest. Of course, self interest is necessary for self preservation. But when shaitan touches it, his golden touch, then the exponential growth of that self interest, it's not just for self preservation anymore, it is for being incredibly greedy, for being incredibly self-centered to the exclusion of anything selfless or self-transcendent. And so doors to insanity really have opened up, doors to completely losing it and not being able to see reality in front of you. Imagine and the best example of it, how manipulative somebody who is always seeking out drugs, how they become. That if you're a heroin addict, if you have been biologically hooked onto a constantly increasing need of heroin, what that person can do, literally that person can murder to get their supply. They would lie, they would they would start selling off the properties of or the belongings of their parents, of their household, of their siblings, of their grandparents, of whoever they can get their hand. They will steal. And this is what somebody told me, that a heroin addict, and this was a former heroin addict, he would say that within our circles, within our junkie circles, this saying is prevalent, that if a junkie has to sell his grandmother's eyes to get his dose, he will. He will. And again, without any personal judgment, without any individual judgment, because there are so many different factors that lead a person to be in the midst of it. Nobody wants to be there to begin with. And to be honest, it starts off when you're so young and naive that what kind of blame or judgment can you really put out there? But it is a social judgment. It is something that our society has inflicted upon us. This pleasure worshiping, this hedonistic culture that has developed within the modern times, and then only made worse in postmodern times. What do we have to speak for ourselves? Quite honestly, being a junkie, being a heroin addict, always going at the drug, that being the center of your life, makes sense given the hedonistic logic, given the self-centered logic, right? And interest is economically what heroin is psychologically or biologically even. The way heroin hits the dopamine centers, boom, and you're blinded to everything else, and all you want to do is more, 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 more of this. Money does that too in the form of interest. It can have that effect. And for that to lead for the society to be more and more manipulative, to be more and more exploitative, that it is in corporate interest and it becomes a corporate value, it becomes a business value to exploit others, to take advantage of other people's misery. It is mind boggling how we've been able to achieve that. See, people talk about how awesome the West is, how incredibly ethical the people in the West are, and that is true as well. That's a contrast that would spring in your face when you move from East to West. You will see all of that, and in the hospitals, and you will see all of that. But what we don't see is that the unethical, the unbridled exploitation, the way it has found its way in the very foundations of the economic structures of the society, it is inescapable. It is inescapable. And somebody somewhere is suffering because of it. Even if it is that somebody happens to be a child in Somalia. And with all of what we look to do with our charity, without addressing this essentially hedonistic economic principle, our charity is only reinforcing poverty if it doesn't do something about this. So all of what it does is the nice, ethical, good people in society, they have distractions. They have all of these avenues to make themselves feel good. While the system, the economic system, with its incredible complexities, is sucking the blood out of a great chunk of the population of humanity. And we need to be very clear here. A simple chanting of slogans, get rid of interest, get rid of interest, get rid of interest, is not going to work. It didn't work. We've been chanting these slogans for so many decades now. The best of our scholars have been chanting these slogans. The best of what we could produce in our mudarrisin of Quran have been chanting these slogans, but enough with the chanting of slogans. If the chanters of slogans, if they haven't been able to see reality for what it is, the complexities within the system that you necessarily have to dive into, understand, and make a real effort, which is going to last a lifetime. Every single one of us knows, whichever field we belong to, whether it's economics or psychology or psychiatry or whatever, that if we really open ourselves up, open our eyes, get out of our own selves or our own selfish interests that our professions are giving us, and see and look to resolve and address the issues of our particular fields, it is a lifetime, at least a lifetime. So deep seated are those issues. And that is true for when you speak about this economic principle, this economic value. It's a business value as well. لا يقومون إلا كما يقوم الذي يتخبطه الشيطان من المس ذلك بأنهم قالوا, that is because they say إنما البيع مثل الربا. Trade is just like riba. Absolutely amazing how you will find this as with a lot of economic jargon, with a lot of company policy, all of what you know, the covers you can put on it, this one statement has become a norm in the world that you live in. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا. But Allah has permitted trading, while He has forbidden riba. Allah's response to that logic is not even getting into it. You want me to reason out why this statement is messed up? Allah says, I don't even want to get into it. This is haram, this is halal. Just take it as such. As for the immediate addressees in Medina, of course, this is sufficient. It's what Allah says. The world we're living in, of course, the addressees are not people who believe in the Quran. So, إِنَّمَا الْبَيْعُ مِثْلُ الرِّبَا, or how trade is not like riba, is open for discussion. It has to be put out there. It has to be delineated. How is it different? I don't know how it's different. I'm not an economist. I don't know the first thing about business. If I did, I'd be doing a whole lot better at it. But for the very basic that I can muster, trade involves risk. Riba doesn't. Riba doesn't. Interest doesn't. It's guaranteed. It is certain growth. And risk entailing choices offer growth, psychologically speaking. Risk-free choices, certain definitive choices in which you are absolutely clear as to what will come out of it. In the short run, they promise maintaining what you have, and maintaining what you have eventually leads to stagnation. Wherever there is risk, there is possibility of growth. There is possibility of loss as well. And from a psychological standpoint, that loss, that suffering, opens further doors for growth. It is as important. In interest, you don't have any of that. In a risk-free, absolutely certain choice, the pursuit of absolute certainty leads to obsessionality, a perfectionism which is impractical within psychology. I am pretty sure it's going to have a similar output in economics, but I can't say. The other extreme within an economic dealing, that of an incredible amount of risk. So when you talk about bay' or trade or business compared to riba, trade would be somewhere along the middle of the continuum in terms of risk, how much risk is involved, interest involving no risk, trade involving a considerable risk, business involving a considerable risk. But then there's gambling, where there's a whole lot of risk. Both ends, both extremes of this continuum are, as we know, those avenues are shut off. Those avenues are closed, or they're supposed to be. They're the destruction of the community. And the business route is more and more encouraged. But of course, when you become more and more spiritual, business is frowned upon. Business or economic pursuits are anti-spiritual or aspiritual. They're like sexuality. They're a compulsion, majburi. You gotta do it because you gotta live. It's not encouraged. It's not the best thing to do. And lo and behold, the world that we're living in, all the spiritual people are so caught up in their spirituality and the clouds of spirituality that they've smoked up around themselves, that they have no idea what's going on in the business sector. When Hazrat Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu got furious at the people in the masjid just staying in the masjid and not going to the marketplace. What are you doing? And before we know it, we have no place in the marketplace. We're the beggars in the marketplace. We're like dependent on people's crumbs. We're too spiritual for the market. That's not an achievement. That's a tragedy. And that's a tragedy brought about in the name of God, in the name of spirituality. How does that make sense? How does that make any sense? But it does make sense for that monastic ascetic, for all our scholarship, religious and spiritual leadership, they pride themselves for having nothing to do with any economic or business matter whatsoever and only having to do the minimal with it. And so then they start catching up in desperation. There are all forms of Islamic banking coming up, and Islamic finance and Islamic economics. Too little, too late. Too little, too late, too superficial. And what are we left with? What we see here repeatedly in Surat Baqarah, if there's anything that you get from this chunk that we're going to talk about today, is how central economics is for a spiritual growth. If the Quran is advocating spending, 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 it is not advocating asceticism and monasticism. It is not advocating you just having nothing to do with business whatsoever. The longest ayah in the Quran, as we are going to see, is about business matters. وَأَحَلَّ اللَّهُ الْبَيْعَ وَحَرَّمَ الرِّبَا فَمَنْ جَاءَهُ مَوْعِظَةٌ مِّن رَبِّهِ فَانْتَهَى. So now the one who receives admonition from his Rabb and desists, فَلَهُ مَا سَلَفَ, he can retain his previous gains. وَأَمْرُهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ, and his case is referred to Allah. وَمَنْ عَادَ, while the one who repeats this, فَأُولَٰئِكَ أَصْحَابُ النَّارِ, these are the people of the hellfire. يَمْحَقُ اللَّهُ الرِّبَا وَيُرْبِي الصَّدَقَاتِ. Allah deprives the riba of all blessings and He allows charities to flourish and grow. وَاللَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ كُلَّ كَفَّارٍ أَثِيمٍ, and Allah does not like any ungrateful sinner. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, and definitely those who believe and act righteously. وَأَقَامُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَآتُوا الزَّكَاةَ, and establish prayer and give zakah. لَهُمْ أَجْرُهُمْ عِنْدَ رَبِّهِمْ, these are the people, for them exclusively is a reward with their Rabb. وَلَا خَوْفٌ عَلَيْهِمْ وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, and they have nothing to fear nor grieve. Khawf and huzn as essential consequences of a self-centered, hedonistic, interest-based society. Hold on to this. We're going to talk about it. I want to talk about this phrase as it occurs in the Quran in more detail as we come across it in later passages. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ttaqullah, you who have believed, observe the taqwa of Allah. Wadharu ma baqiya min ar-riba, and give away, wave off, leave whatever remains to you, whatever is due to you from riba, in kuntum mu'minin, if you really are believers. فَإِن لَمْ تَفْعَلُوا, and if you don't do that, فَأْذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ, then this is an announcement of war from Allah and His Messenger. وَإِن تُبْتُمْ, and if you repent, فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ, you can retain your principal amount. Again, the analogy of how self-centered this entire phenomena is. The Quran, the most heinous analogy imaginable is taking up swords against Allah and His Messenger. That essentially riba is announcing war. It's like you don't care for Allah and His Messenger. You've taken up a sword. Everything that Allah and Rasulullah stand for is anti-riba. And in being pro-riba, you've drawn a sword against them. Right? That's how much invested Allah and Rasulullah are in economic matters. And silence is complicit. Even if you haven't actively taken a sword against them, your The best of your scholars, their silence for the best part of the past couple of centuries, that's criminal. That is criminal. That there is a group of people who have their swords out against Allah and Rasulullah, and then there's a group of scholars sitting right next to this battlefield and doing Allah, 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 Allah. What does that look like? What does that look like? They have nothing to offer. No sides. Not taking, sitting on the fence. If you're doing tasbih, if you're doing durood, all of this is going on. The analogy that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam draws, the levels of riba and the sin that it is. When we talk about sexuality, masturbation is the most selfish, or along the selfish end of the spectrum of sexuality. Self-centered. Having a sexual relationship with one's mother takes that to a whole different level. That's how heinously, how sickeningly self-centered riba is. Again, the connection. الشيطان يعدكم الفقر ويأمركم بالفحشاء. The fahsha and the faqr, how they come together again here within these analogies as well. فَأَذَنُوا بِحَرْبٍ مِّنَ اللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَإِن تُبْتُمْ, and if you repent فَلَكُمْ رُؤُوسُ أَمْوَالِكُمْ, you can retain your principal amount. لَا تَظْلِمُونَ وَلَا تُظْلَمُونَ, do not exploit and you will not be exploited. وَإِن كَانَ ذُو عُسْرَةٍ, and if the debtor is in a financial constraint, فَنَظْرَةٌ إِلَى مَيْسَرَةٍ, grant him time until it is easy for him to pay. وَأَن تَصَدَّقُوا, and if you remit out of charity, let it go altogether. خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ, it is better for you if you really claim to know. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ, and be fearful of the day when you would all be brought back to Allah. ثُمَّ تُوَفَّى كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَا كَسَبَتْ, and then each individual will be paid in full whatever he had earned. وَهُمْ لَا يُظْلَمُونَ, and they will not face any injustice. Very quickly, the couple of things that we've spoken about with respect to interest, just add to that one more thing, and that when interest is spoken of within these passages, it is being contrasted with trade, yes, but we also spoke about the infaq fi sabilillah, how charity, the practice of charity within the society, and how the practice of charity within the society is reflective of Allah's being Dhul Fadl, Allah being the one who is gracious, right? The practice of charity is reflective of a divine attribute being embodied in a human being or in a human society, right? And what is that practice? It is a willingness to give, to empower, to lead to the growth of the other. That is a divine principle. That is Allah's habit, what He wants to do. And so the encouragement of charity we have seen in these ayat is always followed up with attributes of Allah, of Him being ghani, of Him being dhul fadl, of His fadl, of Him being hamid. And so a believing community, a spiritual community, looking to develop these attributes within themselves. And in this context, we look at interest or riba, and we see how this is the antithesis of that divine grace, where riba would then be fir'aunic. It would be exploitative. It would be the exact opposite. It would look to achieve the exact opposite of what charity looks to achieve, where charity looks to empower and lead the other to grow from the giving of the self. Interest looks to make the self grow more and more at the expense of the other. And that's the words with which it is um, criticized, the words with which it is one of the most, if not the most heinous crimes, practically, that can be committed in a society. The second contrast, we spoke about the risk being borne, and it is unfair to say that the interest based transaction is completely risk free. It is probably better to say that the risk is borne only by one party, and that is the one who has to pay the interest. The one giving or loaning the money, completely risk free, no problem at all. It's the imbalance there that is concerning. Anyways, moving right along. يا أيها الذين آمنوا, you who have believed, إذا تداينتم بدين إلى أجل مسمى, when you contract a debt for a fixed period, فاكتبوه, write it down. وَلْيَكْتُبْ بَيْنَكُمْ كَاتِبٌ بِالْعَدْلِ, and let a scribe write it down with justice between you. وَلَا يَأْبَ كَاتِبٌ أَنْ يَكْتُبَ كَمَا عَلَّمَهُ اللَّهُ, and the scribe should not refuse to write as he has been taught by Allah. فَلْيَكْتُبْ, so he must write. وَلْيُمْلِلِ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْحَقِّ, let one who incurs the liability, that is the debtor, dictate the terms and conditions. وَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ رَبَّهُ, and he must observe the taqwa of Allah, his Rabb. Now, interesting how the ability to read and write is Allah takes it to himself. Obviously, you didn't take tutorship from Allah, but it was the development of a potential which was an endowment from Allah, which was a specifically human endowment, something that characterizes and distinguishes human beings, this ability to read and write, how Allah takes it and refers to it as something that he has taught. وَلْيُمْلِلِ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْحَقِّ وَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ رَبَّهُ وَلَا يَبْخَسْ مِنْهُ شَيْئًا, and he should not diminish anything from it. فَإِنْ كَانَ الَّذِي عَلَيْهِ الْحَقُّ سَفِيهًا أَوْ ضَعِيفًا, but if one who incurs the liability is not mentally sound or is weak, أَوْ لَا يَسْتَطِيعُ أَنْ يُمِلَّهُ, or for some other reason is unable to dictate by himself, فَلْيُمْلِلْ وَلِيُّهُ بِالْعَدْلِ, let his guardian dictate with justice. وَاسْتَشْهِدُوا شَهِيدَيْنِ مِنْ رِجَالِكُمْ, and get two witnesses from your own men to witness such transactions. فَإِن لَمْ يَكُونَا رَجُلَيْنِ, but if the two men are not available, فَرَجُلٌ وَامْرَأَتَانِ مِمَّنْ تَرْضَوْنَ مِنَ الشُّهَدَاءِ, then a man and two women from those who you approve as witnesses. أَن تَضِلَّ إِحْدَاهُمَا, that if one of the two women forgets, فَتُذَكِّرَ إِحْدَاهُمَا الْأُخْرَى, then the other can remind her. وَلَا يَأْبَ الشُّهَدَاءُ إِذَا مَا دُعُوا, and the witnesses must not refuse when they are summoned. وَلَا تَسْأَمُوا أَن تَكْتُبُوهُ صَغِيرًا أَوْ كَبِيرًا إِلَى أَجَلِهِ, and do not be lazy in writing down for its fixed period, whether the amount is small or big. ذَلِكُمْ أَقْسَطُ عِنْدَ اللَّهِ, that is closer to justice in the sight of Allah. وَأَقْوَمُ لِلشَّهَادَةِ, and also more solid as evidence. وَأَدْنَى أَلَّا تَرْتَابُوا, and more convenient to prevent doubts. Again, when you're thinking about what may have happened, how much I owe, how much he owes me or she owes me, whatever the case may be, when you are reconstructing memories from just from your head and you don't have any written account, it is very likely that they're going to be colored, that you're going to eventually end up thinking that you owe less and the other owes more, because memories are not pictures, they're reconstructed, and we know that. And the process of reconstruction of memories within human beings is very biased in favor of the one reconstructing the memory, right? So given those tendencies, writing it out and developing a whole system of writing it out is what is advocated. ذلكم أقسط عند الله وأقوم للشهادة وأدنى ألا ترتابوا إلا أن تكون تجارة حاضرة, except if it's a commercial transaction which is concluded on the spot. تُدِيرُونَهَا بَيْنَكُمْ, which you deal with one another. فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَلَّا تَكْتُبُوهَا, there is no blame on you if you don't write it. وَأَشْهِدُوا إِذَا تَبَايَعْتُمْ, and do have someone as witness whenever you settle a commercial deal. وَلَا يُضَارَّ كَاتِبٌ وَلَا شَهِيدٌ, and let no harm be done to the scribe or witness. وَإِن تَفْعَلُوا فَإِنَّهُ فُسُوقٌ بِكُمْ, and if you do so, it will be an act of transgression on your part. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ, and observe the taqwa of Allah. وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ, and Allah teaches you. وَاللَّهُ بِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ عَلِيمٌ, and Allah knows everything. So this was ayah number 282, the longest ayah in the Quran. Hands down, there is no longer ayah in the Quran. It is not talking about salah. It is not talking about hajj. It is not talking about saum. It is not talking about jihad. It is not talking about the love of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It is not talking about tabligh. It is not talking about iqamatul deen, or the establishing of the deen of Allah. It is not talking about any of the priorities that are seen within the religious people today. It is not talking about any of them. It is talking about a purely economic, routine, business, worldly matter, right? And we look back at our religious endeavors, our religious scholarship over the past century particularly, and we do not see this priority reflected. We're always playing catch up. We're always found lagging in these affairs, always, to our own detriment, to our incredible detriment. Anyone who is concerned about these matters, anyone within the Muslim societies who really wants to do something genuine for the economic growth and betterment of Muslim countries, Muslim societies, or the world at large, if he is a Muslim, typically, he would be looked upon as a secular Muslim, and he would not hail from a religious background. He may be a Muslim, but he's not Muslim. That's the standard we're going to see. Whereas those who are Muslim in appearance and background and scholarship and learning and teaching and all of that would have very little to offer here. Again, we've been talking about this repeatedly from the very beginning, but this projection of spirituality, these dualistic hermeneutics, as I phrase them, how do you make sure that the scripture, which has a reformative potential, which has a potential for community building, for bringing people closer, for empowering them, for justice, for order, for truth, for all of that, how do you take that potential away from it? Subjected to dualistic lenses. Dualistic lenses, how? In which there's this other world, there's this afterlife, and it is absolutely superior. And then there is this life. And then there is the trivialities of this life, the frivolities of this life, the vile, evil character of this life. And then you will find this advocacy of this dualism, using scripture, using ayat, using ahadith, out of context, in context, whatever the case may be, just to reinforce that dualism, just to reinforce more and more people cutting themselves off in the name of spirituality. So while the world was making money and becoming more and more economically stable, interest-based economies or otherwise, we were busy building our akhirah. Really? What kind of an akhirah can you really build at the cost of the community. At least the sense that the Quran has given us so far, 282 ayat into it, plus the 7 from Fatiha, this does not seem to be the religiosity that it's advocating. This anti-world, anti-dunya religiosity. It's, it's incredible. The efforts of the religious and spiritual efforts of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they changed the economic structure and practices of the Arabs for times to come, where Muslims would become leaders in trade, in finance, in developing these preliminary commandments to entire systems. That was the result of his efforts. What's the result of our efforts over the past couple of centuries or even past couple of decades? What have we done? What have we done? And then if we criticize this incredible negligence, this criminal negligence, then it is seen as being anti-scholarship, or religious scholars are being attacked, or religious people are being attacked, or I don't know, Islam is being attacked. Who's responsible for this criminal negligence? And who do we have to blame? And then we come up with, oh, no, we're not ascetic, we're not monastic, we've done this, we've done that, we take economics seriously, we take the financial matters seriously. To what effect? To what effect? Oh, you know, the world that we're living in, and there's like these Jewish conspiracies, and there's Israel, and there's Mossad, and there's America, and come on, really, you want to whine now? That's the best you have? We're going to defend our irresponsible behavior, our criminal negligence, and pretty soon after this blaming of, when these conspiracy theories, not to say there's no truth to them, I'm sure there is. We know there is. But that's completely irrelevant. It's nothing more than an excuse in the context of the conversation. Pretty soon the second excuse start coming up, oh, you know, we're living in the end of times, and the whole end of times narrative is going to start. Oh, the Prophet ﷺ, how dare you? Really, how dare you bring in the name of Prophet ﷺ and his ahadith to defend this criminal behavior? Seriously. Oh no, the Mahdi is going to come, and you know, the Mahdi is going to, we can't really do anything until he comes. Then why don't you commit suicide? Really, kill yourselves off. What use are you if you're utterly useless without the Mahdi? You freaking waste of oxygen, burden on the face of this planet. Oh, you know, Nuh alayhi salam worked for 950 years and he didn't get. Oh, stop whining. Stop whining. We're not going to do anything. We're not going to get off our backsides. We're not going to take any responsibility whatsoever. Could it be more obvious? And we're not even allowed to say anything. This is Allah teaching. وَيُعَلِّمُكُمُ اللَّهُ. Allah teaching you economics and then trusting you to take it forward, and you don't, in His name. How do you defend that? How do you defend that? Who's going to take responsibility for the largest percentage of a religious population which is economically illiterate? Who's going to take responsibility? That the best part of your scholarship has nothing intelligent to say in these areas at all. Forget about, and if it is in any way intelligent, it's inconsequential. And what's worse is that there are no practical efforts that you can cite that are taking place to make up for it, because whatever 2.5 neurons you have left in your brain are spent in rationalizing, justifying, and coming up with excuses for this criminal negligence. It's incredible. And those excuses happen to be religious. Where did this conversation start from? Ayatul Kursi. Where is this conversation going to end? Last two ayats of Surat Baqarah. What is bracketed between them? Entirely economic affairs. Why doesn't that show in your priorities? Why doesn't your tawheed that emanates from Ayatul Kursi that you recite after every prayer and your imaniyat in the prophets and the whatever you get from that dua that Baqarah concludes with, and how you recite that every night before going to bed? Why is your economic practice not bracketed between that? What's wrong? You want to be nice and no, not critical. You should be positive. You shouldn't be cynical. وَإِن كُنْتُمْ عَلَى سَفَرٍ, but if you are traveling, وَلَمْ تَجِدُوا كَاتِبًا, and you cannot find a scribe, فَرِهَانٌ مَقْبُوضًا, then a security deposit should be taken. فَإِنْ أَمِنَ بَعْضُكُمْ بَعْضًا, and if one of you entrusts the other, فَلْيُؤَدِّ الَّذِي اؤْتُمِنَ أَمَانَتَهُ, then the trustee must deliver the trust to its owner. وَلْيَتَّقِ اللَّهَ رَبَّهُ, and he must observe the taqwa of Allah, his Rabb. وَلَا تَكْتُمُ الشَّهَادَةِ, and do not conceal the testimony. وَمَنْ يَكْتُمْهَا, and whoever conceals it, فَإِنَّهُ آثِمٌ قَلْبُهُ, for sure his heart is sinful. وَاللَّهُ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ عَلِيمٌ, and Allah knows whatever you do. لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ, to Allah alone belongs whatever is in the heavens and whatever is on the earth. وَإِن تُبْدُوا, that's another thing that this sort of a demonic economy precludes: Allah's right of ownership. Because within this demonic economy is an open proclamation of absolute human ownership. Absolute human ownership. And we don't care. Not that when Allah claims ownership, He doesn't deprive humans of any right. Rather, His claim to ownership, practically, He says, regard that, mind it, know it. And for that reason, these couple of instructions that you have to constrain yourselves in, these few principles. And then the structure develops from those principles with the application of the human mind. Spiritually rooted in those principles, but an activity of the human mind nevertheless. But why would we apply a human mind anyways? The mind is inferior. The mind, reason, yeah. Because in parallel to this criminal negligence of not having done anything in this sphere, in this department. That's not the only department. There's pretty much every other uh, department of society, of social life, that we're responsible, whether it's psychology or it's sociology or it's politics, you name it. There's criminal negligence everywhere. This criminal negligence is backed up by, or in parallel to it, is this discouragement, or um, this condescension for the usage of aql, that the best part of your time and your sermons and your aql even is spent in talking about how deviant aql can be, how lowly aql is. It's pretty incredible. For a Quran which is rife with أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ أَفَلَا يَعْقِلُونَ لَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. So are you spending most of your time dissing aql? Pretty incredible. لِلَّهِ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَمَا فِي الْأَرْضِ. To Allah alone belongs whatever is in the heavens and the earth. وَإِن تُبْدُوا مَا فِي أَنفُسِكُمْ. Whether you expose what is within you, أَوْ تُخْفُوهُ, or you keep it secret, يُحَاسِبْكُم بِهِ اللَّهُ. Allah will bring you to account for it. Another symbolic validation to economic matters comes in the language that the Quran uses. The Quranic metaphor for akhirah is very economic. Hisab, reward, punishment, khair, loss, profit. There's a lot of, and we've seen this throughout. Allah prides himself in being hasib. It's one of his attributes. يُحَاسِبْكُم بِهِ اللَّهُ. Allah will bring you to account for it. فَيَغْفِرُ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. Then he will pardon, he will forgive whoever he wants. وَيُعَذِّبُ مَن يَشَاءُ. And he punishes whoever he wants. وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ قَدِيرٌ. And Allah has power over everything. The last two ayats that follow, that Surah Baqarah closes with, that this discussion closes with, the only two ayats which are neither Meccan nor Madani technically, because Rasulullah ﷺ was neither in Mecca nor Medina, even though that's where he spent the entirety of his life. He wasn't in either of those two cities when these ayats were revealed. And to understand the significance of these ayats, we cannot take them away from the seerah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, for where Rasulullah was at the time of the revelation of these ayats. When Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is really with the part that we read in Baqarah, the point where when it comes where the Prophet and the people with him say Mata Nasrullah. It was that bleak, it was that dark in Mecca at that time, where if Rasulullah was ever going to say that, that was the time. That was the time. Where he spent a decade with the Quran, with the best of the Quran being revealed, and the worst of the Quraysh coming in response, in the abuses that they hurled at him, in the criticisms that they hurled at him, in the tortures that they subjected him and the Sahaba to, the social boycott of the entire clan of Banu Hashim has just happened. It's just barely finished. A pain that not just the Muslims, but Everyone of the Banu Hashim has been subjected to, Abu Talib included, of where they were literally forced to eat leaves. They didn't have enough food. Had a whole lot of abuses. And then to cap that off, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam loses the greatest emotional, financial, social, spiritual support that he had in the form of Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha, love of his life. The one who believed in him when he did not believe in himself. When he thought he was becoming something of a poet, or that this was some jinn or sihr, and he might as well just jump off the mountain. He acknowledges experiencing all of this. She took him in her arms, in her lap, and said, no, this can't be anything evil because it's you. She gave him the emotional support that he needed at that time. She gave him all the justifications from his own character to reassure him at that time, where he was thoroughly shaken up. An entire night spent in panic and anxiety. And she was the one holding him. Where she doesn't stop there. She goes to every end possible to make him believe in himself. She takes him to Warqa bin Nawfal. He gets his testimony. Warqa is bringing his knowledge of Christianity, his knowledge of the Bible to affirm Rasulullah. There's an experience with the coming of Jibreel in her presence. And Rasulullah is not sure, is this a jinn? Is this an angel? What is this? What am I seeing? What am I experiencing? Why is this happening to me? She takes off her shirt as a demonstration. Is he still here? No, he's gone. See, he's an angel. If he was a jinn, he would have stayed. And everything, every single penny that she had was at his disposal already, but then it is now in the way of Islam. Stands by him like a rock, unyielding for 10 years. You can imagine pretty much everything that went around in those 10 years, she was there. When Abu Lahab said what he said when Rasulullah came out in public, he had her to go back to reassure him, to reinforce him, to strengthen him, to support him. When Yasir and Sumayya were killed, martyred, he had her to go back to. When he is witnessing the torture of Bilal, when he is witnessing the torture of every single Sahabi, he has her to go back to. And come year 10, he doesn't have her to go back to. Abu Talib's support is ensuring that Rasulullah is not killed by anyone in the Quraysh, because Abu Talib has his hand on his back as a mushrik. Abu Talib is gone. It's only a matter of time before Rasulullah becomes open game, hunting season. Who's the target? Who are we hunting? Prophet of Allah. He comes back from Ta'if, the worst experience of his life, stoned to unconsciousness, bled by street urchins, by the bad boys from the street. And before that, the abuses from the leaders of Ta'if. He doesn't have Khadija to hold him in her arms, tell him it's okay, that it will be okay. He doesn't have Abu Talib to say, don't worry, the Quraysh are not going to lay a hand on you. He doesn't have that. When he comes back from Taif, he doesn't have that. So who takes him in his arms? Who tells him, don't worry? Allah. That's when Mi'raj happens. Surah Yusuf comes around that time too. But the reassurance necessary, the consolation is necessary, that is necessary at that time, is such that standard revelation won't do. Allah revealing to Rasulullah on earth, as incredible as that is, it won't do. He calls them his home. And this is what he gives them. For the first phrase, it is a certificate of his iman having been accepted. Aman al-Rasul. The Prophet believed that to get that certificate, he had to go through all of what he went through. That his iman has been accepted. Aman al-Rasul. Because honestly, and we see this within the Quran, the reassurance, the consolation that he's getting repeatedly. All of the vile evil that he saw, despite all of that, his ilm, his humility was such that he would always fall back on himself. Did I do something wrong? Am I not doing this right? Am I required to do anything more? And the Quran comes down and says, no, 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 you're okay. وَمَا أَنْتَ بِمَلُومٍ. They are idiots. They are the vermin of the earth. They are the The Quran has to come down and tell Rasulullah ﷺ that you're okay, it's them. And so for him to get that certificate of Iman, Aman al-Rasul, the messenger believed. And the messenger believed, why? Because the messenger, for the first part, did not believe. When he experienced revelation in Hira, as we just spoke about, he didn't think he was getting revelation. His humility didn't let him get there. So he had to really overcome that obstacle. He was entertaining doubts about his own prophethood at the onset of revelation. And then he did believe, and boy did he believe. And Allah acknowledges and certifies that his belief is true. آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه والمؤمنون. He believed what was sent to him from his Rabb, as did the mu'minun. So he not only gets a certificate for himself, he gets a certificate for all the Sahaba. And when you go back there, you tell them that Allah testifies that they believed. Who did they believe in? Kullun amana billah. All of them believed in Allah. See, for a people who are constantly suspicious of their faith, and productively so, proactively so, because they know not everyone who says amanna wa saddaqna is actually believing and testifying. They know the possibility of hypocrisy. They're people of Quran if there ever were people of Quran. For them to get this reassurance is kullun amana billah. They all believed in Allah. Wa malaikatihi, and his angels, wa kutubihi, and his books. This is not a fabrication of your mind. This is not a projection of your desires. This is what it means to them, because they would be suspicious of themselves. And they would be constantly looking to do more. Kullun amana billahi wa malaikatihi wa kutubihi wa rusuli. They believe in his angels, his books, his messengers. La nufarriqu bayna ahadim min rusuli. Saying that we do not distinguish any of his messengers, in the sense of rejecting one, that he is not a messenger, he's half a messenger. No, messengers of Allah. They're all messengers of Allah. That they've taken ownership of that entire legacy, culminating with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the lives that they have lived testify that they are the true inheritors of those prophets. They did not distinguish. They did not make less of any messenger. Because really, when you take Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam out of the picture, and you have professed faith in others, there is a necessary question: what is it that you believe of Rasulullah and his claim that he's made? When you're accepting Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and there is truth that you see in Christianity or Judaism or any other religion for that matter, is perfectly fine, because we verify that truth. That is our truth. That is our legacy. But how do you, when you reject Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, what is it that you say? How do you explain the truths that he brought? And rejecting his truths, what does that say of your truths? لا نفرق بين أحد من رسله وقالوا, and they always call upon Allah, saying سمعنا وأطعنا. We listen and we obey. This is a free man's submission, freely giving in to Allah. غفرانك ربنا, our Rabb, forgive us. Our Rabb, imploring that this is your rububiyyah that we're connected with. And we will make mistakes. We will not live up to it the way it deserves. We will not live up to our own potential that you have placed inside of us, that you see in us. You know what? Just let it go and let us reach it with whatever efforts that we have to present before you. وَإِلَيْكَ الْمَصِيرُ, and to you is our final destination. See, this returning to Allah, when it emanates from the place that it's emanating from, the state of their heart, which we can only imagine, really. May we experience it. But you can say that this meeting of Allah It is with anticipation and fear at the same time. There's a longing for Allah, but then there is also this nervousness. وَإِلَيْكَ الْمَصِيرُ لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. See, to hear this at that time, that Ya Rasulullah, you are worthy of all the suffering that you've been through. If you were not worthy of it, we would not have put this upon you. Allah does not burden a soul beyond their worth. How's that for a translation? لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها. Allah does not burden a soul beyond his worth, beyond their stature. If you're going through pain, if you're going through difficulty, it's not that you deserve it, it's because you're worth it. You're good enough for it. You're strong enough for it. It is not a judgment on your failures and shortcomings. It is an appreciation, it is a certification of your strength. Laha ma kasabat. And for it, for that soul, for that person, it's whatever they earn. وَعَلَيْهَا مَكْتَسَبَتْ. And against it, it is whatever it wrought. It is fully responsible in those situations. رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا. Our Rabb, don't take us to task. إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا. If we forget or we make a mistake. See, it is in teaching us this dua that its acceptance is implicit. Your mistakes and your forgetfulness, you will not be held to account for, provided it is this attitude that you bring forth. If you become arrogant on your forgetfulness and your mistakes and don't even see them as such, and there is no attitude of making any repairs or any reconciliation or any rectification, then ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا. Our Rabb, do not make us bear a burden كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا, like that which you laid upon those before us. See, Bilal radiallahu ta'ala anhu was placed under that incredibly heavy rock on the desert sand, suffocated, beaten, deprived of food and water, whipped. The Sahaba were placed on burning embers. Yasir and Sumayya were martyred. Rasulullah ﷺ was strangulated to the point of his eyes bobbling out. And all the pain that they went through in Mecca, in Medina, Ahzab, everything, so that we wouldn't have to. And again, in giving Rasulullah this, and in Mi'raj, Allah is telling him that things are going to be easier for your subsequent generation because of you, because of your Sahaba. they won't have to pay a price as heavy for La ilaha illallah. They won't be subjected to this level of physical pain precisely because you did. And we see that in the dua that he's gifted with. ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إسرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا. Do not make us bear a burden like that which you laid upon those before us. Simply can't take it. We're not worth it. ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به. And our burden is not with that which we have no ability to bear. Again, when we do go through experiences where coupled with those experiences is the thought that I can't take this. I can't take this. Within those experiences, the counter is that no, you can. And in whatever way you are responsible in the state that you're in, is only that which you are capable of bearing. So if there is anything in that experience which is actually beyond your capacity, there is no responsibility or accountability for it either. Allah knows. Allah knows. But if you're being put through it, for the most part, it's because you can. What comes with it is the ability to take care of it. That there are resources somewhere within or outside of you through which you can pull through. وَاعْفُ عَنَّا وَاغْفِرْ لَنَا وَارْحَمْنَا. Ya Allah, let us go. Be flexible with us. Just, let things slide. Cover things up for us and have mercy on us. Anta Maulana, you're our friend. You are our friend, our guardian friend, our protecting friend. Ansurna ala al-qawm al-kafirin. So help us against the disbelieving people. So implicit with this gift of dua is the announcement of acceptance. Provided dua is made, provided the dua is lived. That's what he brought back from Mi'raj. A gift for all of us. This dua is those 10 years of seerah, the experience of Mi'raj, along with the gift of the salawat, which is a reiteration or a reliving of the Mi'raj for non-prophets, for other than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's what Baqarah concludes with. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'een. One thing we did not do for the lack of time, but we can do, is what the last two ayat represent within the humility of the one calling out the dua that the mu'min who has believed, who has been certified with that iman, and how it contrasts with the attitude of the Bani Israel in the first half of Surat Baqarah that we spoke about. the humility of the believer as it contrasts with the arrogance of the one with the sense of entitlement to scripture in this world and paradise in the next, and everything else that goes with it. Contrast that, and then contrast the rigidity that comes into that sort of a religiosity, where there is so much inflexibility, where there is so much about that God of the people who have this self entitlement, that their his forgiveness in so many different ways um, is not accounted for. That they would be in certain rituals, in certain prohibitions, so unyielding that one is led to think whatever happened um, to the maghfirah of Allah, to the that he lets things go and he lets things slide and he covers up and he forgives and he's merciful. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So um, something to explore, something to reflect upon. Moving right along to Surat Al Imran. Now, Baqarah and Al Imran, as most of you know, are a pair, and this pairing is an important subject within Quranic studies as to how they complement each other. They reflect a lot of the same themes, but then they cover up for each other as well. And how put together you can learn new lessons which isolated you wouldn't be able to learn. Where Surah Baqarah warned the believers to not be like the Bani Israel in the way they were presented or the way they were prevailing around Rasulullah at that time. This particular one highlights a tendency to get misguided the way the Christians did historically, right? And Muslims also did historically. So we have the unique honor within Islam to have been misguided both the way of the Jews and the Christians, right? We would find both of these representations in not only our history but also our and most importantly in our present, right? So we will see this focus. The first, again, also the way Surah Baqarah was two halves, this two will be in two halves. This is the first 10 passages, 10 rukus of Surah Ali Imran would be in place of the first 18 that we saw in Surat Baqarah, and or complementing those. This comprises more of the 100 and there's 101 ayat in these 10 passages. Um, and then the second half will address Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu more, as did the second half of Surat Baqarah. Uh, like Surat Baqarah had the first four rukus being introductory, these two, the first one third of the ayats of these first 10 rukus would be more of an introductory nature, and then the middle chunk will talk to Nasara, address the Nasara, the way Bani Israel were addressed in Baqarah. And then we see the transition and we see the address turning to the Muslim community directly. Okay, so we will talk more about this distribution as we go on. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alif Lam Mim. Allahu la ilaha illahu. Allah, there is no ilah except Him. Al Hayyul Qayyum. The Hayy, the Qayyum, the sustainer. Again, a lot of the surahs of the Quran will begin with attributes of Allah so as to introduce the mutakallim, the one whose kalam this is. Who is he? his credentials, if you will. He is Al-Hayy Al-Qayyum. He is the Ilah. All of what we spoke about, bring to mind in the context of Ayatul Kursi. نزل عليك الكتاب بالحق. He sent the book to you, Ya Rasulullah, with truth. With truth in that it is a representation of truth and representation of what is true, meaning without it is not without consequence that you refuse this. Whenever you refuse truth, any aspect of al-haq that is rejected will have consequences. Will have consequences. So it is al-haq in those two connotations at least. مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. And part of the identity of the Quran, a very important self-identification for the Quran is how it confirms what precedes it. مُصَدِّقًا لِمَا بَيْنَ يَدَيْهِ. It confirms that which preceded it. وَأَنزَلَ التَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلَ. It is the same God, the same Hayyul Qayyum, the same Allah, La ilaha illa who sent the Tawrat and the Injil. Min qabl, before that, hudal linnas, as a guidance for humanity, wa anzal al-furqan, and he had sent down the criterion to judge between right and wrong, standards of right and wrong. It's not relative. It is not absolutely relative. If there was an oxymoronic term, it's that, where you're talking about relativism, and then there's relativism means that there can't be anything absolute, but then relativism itself is absolute. وَأَنزَلَ الْفُرْقَانِ, he has sent down the criterion. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا بِآيَاتِ اللَّهِ, and those who reject, do kufr of the ayat of Allah, لَهُمْ عَذَابٌ شَدِيد, for them is a severe punishment. That is what it means to reject al-haq. Wallahu azizun dhu intiqam, and Allah is mighty, capable of retribution. Inna Allah la yakhfa alayhi shay, and for sure there is nothing hidden from Allah. Fil ardi wala fis sama, on earth nor in the heaven. Huwa alladhi yusawwirukum, he is the one who fashioned you, who shapes you. Fil arham, in the wombs. So in the depths of the wombs, and this is pretty incredible when you reflect upon it. It is the way Allah presents the development of a human being. You speak about the nurturing mother, you speak about the loving mother, taking care of her child, loving her child, being very concerned about the smallest need of the child. And Allah wants us to think of Him from that stage, particularly bringing that to mind, within the womb, within the raham, the source of the word rahmah, and how He is actively engaged in this process of beautification, of shaping, of this artistic creation that is you. Fil arham, in the wombs, kayfa yasha, however He wants it. His freedom being exercised in the womb, and how the manifestation of the freedom of Allah, His creative freedom, is seen in the diversity in creation. That there are so many of us, and there have been so many of us, billions now and before, and yet you will be hard pressed to find identical faces, identical personalities. There is such incredible diversity, which speaks to the creative freedom or Allah's habit of creating more and more distinct, beautiful. See, a rigid, law-based, if it was mere mechanics, the way not very long ago, the conception of the universe as being very mechanical was prevalent, and it has influenced and still influences the way we look at the world. If it was just that, diversity cannot be explained in there, especially the degree of diversity that we see. If everything was rigidly this law, this happens, this law, this happens, this law, this happens as a result, that absolute causality, the cause and effect way of thinking, of how it obscures our vision of reality, our vision of the world, our vision of physics, biology, psychology. And then when we fall into it and look to find God within that strict causality, how it obscures our vision of God, how it takes away his freedom, his creative freedom. La ilaha illahu, there is no ilah except him. How his uluhiyah, and this is a reason to love him. This is a reason um, to rely on him. This is a reason. This is meaning. How meticulously and lovingly involved he was in making you uniquely beautiful. لا إله إلا هو العزيز الحكيم هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب. He is the one who sent down to you the book. منه آيات محكمات. So the one who was lovingly and nurturingly involved in your development as a fetus, as an embryo, and even prior to that, is the one who, in the fulfillment of the same teleological end, heavy word of saying, jargon to say meaningful, the meaning towards which she created you then, it is that same meaning, it is in continuity with that revelation comes down as well. That ayat complement the process, the meaningfulness of which is apparent when you reflect on those biological experiences. هو الذي أنزل عليك الكتاب منه آيات محكمات. Some of the verses are decisive. They are muhkam. They are hunna ummul kitab. They are the foundation of the book. وأخر متشابهات. Others are allegorical. There's metaphor involved. So another way of putting it is those muhkam, the range of interpretation is restricted, is relatively less. And then there's mutashabihat, in which the range is far more flexible. It is far greater. There is a whole lot more that can be said in there. There is a range, nevertheless, obviously, considering that human beings are part of this interpretive process of the book. فَأَمَّا الَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ زَيْغٌ. Those who have perverted hearts, فَيَتَّبِعُونَ مَا تَشَابَهَ مِنْهُ. They will particularly pursue the allegorical part, ابتغاء الفتنة, seeking fitna. That from within that range, the much greater range that is there in the mutashabihat, they will look to draw out particularly those kinds of interpretation which will seek discord, which will seek fitna, which will seek corruption, which will make things worse. وَابْتِغَاءَ تَأْوِيلِ. And they would seek rigid interpretation. That this is, Allah has already declared that there is a good portion that is mutashabihat. There is no one interpretation of it. So going after that which already has that range, going after a particular interpretation from within that range, fixing it to that and nothing else, how we know that results in a fitna. وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ. And no one knows the exact interpretation except Allah. So when you fixate the translation or the interpretation, it is this and nothing else. And you have to believe in it as such, otherwise you're off the manhaj. You're putting yourself in the place of God. You're putting yourself, you're making godlike claims. That is something only Allah can claim. How dare you make those claims? And how dare you exclude others from the circle of Islam on the basis of this attitude or these fixed, rigid interpretations? وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ. Those who are well grounded in knowledge, يَقُولُونَ, they say, آمَنَّا بِهِ. First up, we believe in it. Our belief is in what has been revealed. كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. All of this is from our Rabb. Now, implicit is in this is that it is reflective of the rububiyyah of Allah, and so the interpretation, or at least one standard of the interpretation, would be that which is in consonance with that rububiyyah, which is promising and showing growth the way we know Allah wants for us to grow and develop. Right? So I'll have an interpretation, you'll have an interpretation, C will have an interpretation. There's a whole range of interpretations that are possible, right? But of course, they have to stay within, even no matter how mutashabih an ayah becomes, there's still the range. You cannot go outside of that range and just say absolutely anything. Again, no relativism implied there if a range is being accommodated or spoken of, necessitated actually. But then, which is closer to the what is intended by Allah? The results of those interpretations, of what kind of conduct, of what kind of society that results in. Is it the type you would see, okay, this is reflective of the rububiyyah of Allah, this is going in the direction that we do have something of a consensus on, that Allah wants for us to go in. وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلٌّ مِّنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. All of it is from our Rabb. وَمَا يَذَّكَّرُ إِلَّا أُولُو الْأَلْبَابِ. And none will be reminded of it except the people of reason. So already the importance and significance of reason within this process of interpretation is acknowledged. So you want to ignore that altogether? Reason and how reason works, logic and its different facets, you do so at your own peril. Because then what you're missing out on is one of the most indispensable tools for understanding scripture itself, for making sense of scripture. And you can do away with it. You can do away with refining your understanding of how reason works or how logic works and how all of that stuff works. Fair enough. Then understand that some form of a deviant, degenerate, unrefined, unexamined use of reason is present in your act of interpretation. You're oblivious of it, which is what makes it all the more dangerous. رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا. And so, again, what is this attitude of humility reflecting? The probabilistic nature of human interpretation. That any claims of absolute certainty on particular interpretations and rigidity thereupon is uncalled for. It's a godlike claim. رَبَّنَا لَا تُزِغْ قُلُوبَنَا. I would even say it's a Fir'aun-like claim. Our Rabb, do not let our hearts deviate. بعد إذ هديتنا, after you have guided us. وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة, and gift us from your special mercy. إنك أنت الوهاب, for sure you are the one who bestows. ربنا, our Rabb, إنك جامع الناس ليوم لا ريب فيه. Our Rabb, you will gather all of humanity on a day about which there is no doubt. إن الله لا يخلف الميعاد. Definitely Allah does not go against His promise. So we conclude with this for today, inshallah, and we continue from the second ruku tomorrow. Wa akhiru da'wana and alhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.